The air in the executive lounge hummed with manufactured jubilation. My crystal flute felt heavy, a cold sentinel against my palm, as I observed the charade unfolding. Bernard Maxwell, our division head, beamed, his perfectly coiffed silver hair gleaming under the spotlights. A ripple of enthusiastic clapping swept through the room, punctuated by forced chuckles. Beside him, June Landry, her cheeks flushed a vibrant rose, pretended a modest surprise she clearly didn't feel. I took a slow sip of the chilled, sparkling wine, the crisp bubbles doing little to mask the bitter tang on my tongue. Her innovative approach truly set her apart, Bernard announced, his voice smooth as polished marble. June has proven herself indispensable for this regional strategy lead role. My former title, my former dominion. I held my smile steady, a mask of agreeable professionalism. Let them toast. The board was only just beginning to be set. It had been barely 4 months since I'd first encountered June. She'd been navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the onboarding center, a bundle of barely contained jitters, wrestling with her badge access and a precarious stack of orientation manuals. A recent graduate from a prestigious, no doubt exorbitant, business program. Guide her through the ropes. I was instructed, so I did. I meticulously walked her through the intricacies of the proprietary data models I'd architected, corrected her initial, glaring errors on client presentations, patiently elucidated the logic behind every operational framework I had personally developed over nearly a decade. Her eyes, wide and perpetually earnest, followed my every movement. She scribbled diligently in her notebook, nodded with unnerving frequency, and frequently chirped, "I aspire to your level, Anya." The irony, I would later discover, was not lost on her. The insidious shift began subtly. A peculiar turn of phrase in a quarterly review deck, a new initiative she championed that bore an uncanny resemblance to a concept I'd privately pitched weeks prior. Then, the digital breadcrumbs started to vanish. My name, once omnipresent on key communication threads, began to be conspicuously absent. Invitations to high-level strategic sessions, once defaulting to my inbox, rerouted to hers. I received only the sanitized executive summaries. One evening, long after the office had emptied, I accessed the central data repository, a system I'd virtually built from the ground up, and checked the authentication logs. Under my unique credentials, June Landry had systematically accessed and downloaded 3 years' worth of my comprehensive performance analyses, market trend predictions, and client success metrics. It wasn't about tutelage. It was a methodical, sanctioned extraction of my intellectual property. There was no emotional outburst, no frustrated tears shed in the sterile quiet of the restroom, no dramatic confrontation in a crowded meeting room. They undoubtedly anticipated such a display. Instead, I dissected the situation with clinical precision. She coveted my perch. Very well. She could ascend to the leadership seat, but I would ensure her kingdom was utterly barren. Over the ensuing weekend, I executed my meticulously planned withdrawal. I burrowed deep into the proprietary back-end systems, discreetly disengaging myself from every critical, undocumented workflow I had personally engineered. Automation triggers, solely reliant on my unique system ID, were dissolved. Deep-seated knowledge repositories, crucial for intricate operational processes, were resecured under an obsolete security protocol, a relic only my legacy access could penetrate. Every action was entirely legitimate, perfectly auditable, and unequivocally tied to my 7 years of dedicated contribution. By Monday morning, the executive dashboards glowed with an illusory green. On the surface, everything appeared seamless. But as the work week gained momentum, the intricate gears of the department began to seize. June's calls to my direct line started almost immediately. The first 2 were voicemail messages, escalating from perplexed inquiry to barely disguised panic. "Anya," one message stuttered, "I can't seem to locate the primary client data streams. The directory structure is unfamiliar." Of course, it was the intuitive nomenclature, the layered logical architecture. It was all my design, embedded 3 operational tiers deep. It would take her, at minimum, weeks to reverse engineer. Yet, that wasn't the fundamental disruption. The true void resided in the intangible, the intricate web of context, the cultivated client relationships, the bedrock of institutional trust. You cannot supplant nearly a decade of earned influence with a saccharine smile and plagiarized performance indicators. By Wednesday, the critical Q3 financial projections languished unsubmitted. The regional sales pipeline, once robust, had inexplicably ground to a halt. June, visibly unmoored, was sinking. The senior leadership's inquiries grew sharper. Disgruntled clients, bypassing June entirely, began dialing my number directly. I overheard her on several occasions, desperately attempting to redirect their calls, passing them off to anyone else within earshot. She held the title, but the authority was absent. Thursday morning saw a flurry of messages from my former team. Anya, could you just clarify the protocol for the cross-departmental budget approvals? June's new methodology isn't yielding consistent results. I'll let the initial 3 pings go unanswered. My reply to the 4th was succinct. My system access has been revoked. I wish you the best. By Friday, Bernard Maxwell finally reached out, requesting a brief, informal debrief with June. I informed him I had a prior engagement. I didn't, but the silent affirmation of the power dynamic was precisely the message I intended to convey. I arrived at the office early on Monday, not out of obligation, but personal satisfaction. June was already hunched over her desk, her face pale and drawn, fingers flying across the keyboard, as if sheer velocity could conjure order from the chaos before the mandatory morning briefing. Her head snapped up as I entered, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in her shadowed eyes. Anya, she began, her voice hoarse. Can we speak? I settled into a vacant chair, crossing one leg over the other, and waited. I think there's been some misunderstanding, she stammered, gesturing vaguely at her screens. I'm attempting to get the operational pipelines flowing, but it's as if crucial components are just gone. They are, I stated, my tone even devoid of malice, merely factual. She hesitated, visibly struggling for composure. Perhaps we simply started on the wrong foot. I genuinely hold you in high regard. No, I countered, my voice low and firm. You meticulously analyzed my output. That's a distinct difference. She blinked, her gaze faltering. I leaned slightly forward. You didn't surpass my performance. You merely repackaged it, and they awarded you the recognition. That is perfectly acceptable. But now, you must construct something entirely from scratch. Her eyes swept across the mounting spreadsheets, the notifications piling up, the dense calendar of meetings she clearly couldn't navigate. You'll eventually find your footing, I offered, but the shared silence confirmed what both of us inherently understood. She wouldn't. That very afternoon, I convened with a senior executive from a rival conglomerate and exclusive private club, a connection I'd subtly cultivated for months. She had observed the unraveling of the regional division from a strategic distance. I presented her with a solid-state drive, brimming with the advanced analytical models and innovative procedural frameworks I had deliberately withheld from my previous employer. In return, she slid a binding agreement across the polished table, an elevated executive title, a remuneration package double my former salary, and a genuine acknowledgement of my expertise. My official resignation was succinct and devoid of embellishment. No histrionics, just the unequivocal statement, effective immediately. Bernard's calls went directly to voicemail. His urgent emails remained unread. The solitary message I chose to acknowledge was from June Landry. Subject line, guidance. The body contained a single, desperate query. If you were in my shoes, what would your next step be? My concise reply, delivered just before sundown, begin true assimilation.